Thank you very much for your patience. My name is Francesca Behr. I'm gonna talk about something slightly different today. And again, the title of my presentation, as you can see, is Women, the Classics, and Print Culture in Renaissance Italy. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, okay, sorry. At the beginning, and I will read because you don't wanna, let an Italian woman a microphone unbridled without a script. So for your own sake, I'm going to read. At the beginning of the Cinquecento in Italy, translation, rewritings, and adaptations of classical text originally written in Latin or Greek from classical authors into vernacular Italian become increasingly available. They're crafted for a wider audience, that is an upper and middle class of intellectually curious readers hindered by little or no Latin language ability. Women, being part of this group, become readers and dedicatees of many translations and eventually writers of new works inspired from the translated edition of the classics. The works these women pen in Italian show their fruitful dialogue with the classical tradition. Italians show, during the 16th century, the advent of the printing press facilitated the spreading of written culture with the circulation of classical text as well as books in translation. The publication of so many books in translation was in part responsible for the standardization of national idioms, the different languages of Europe, like Italian, French, German, Spanish, which became the norm in locally printed materials. Thanks to them, in Italy and Europe, literacy levels crept upwards. The availability of text in translation for women is a phenomenon of essential importance. In the Renaissance, key disciplines of humanistic studies such as rhetoric, history, poetry, philosophy were considered fundamental for boys destined to become politicians, clerks, physicians, etc., all needing to be persuasive in the public sphere. For them, education was conceived as the study of classical authors, essential in the development of dialectic skills. The stress on virtuous and effective public action as the principal goal of learning remained a founding principle in Renaissance education. Consequently, women destined to remain at home were excluded from it. Virtue for them was posited mainly as chastity, marital obedience, care of the family, religious piety. Renaissance treatises about instruction show a strongly gendered understanding of education as they attempt to reconcile, or not, women's education with norms of stereotypical female behavior, emphasizing modesty, silence, and obedience. Silvio Antoniano, just to mention one, in his On the Christian Education of Children, objected to women knowing how to speak eloquently or learning languages, not seeing the advantage that would be derived from this for the common good or for the girls themselves. Some women, nevertheless, especially those in privileged conditions, studied Latin with private tutors. Even others, in less fortunate conditions, acquired this knowledge indirectly. For instance, this is a very funny case. Marta Marchina, the daughter of a soap maker, learned Latin from her two brothers who attended a religious school in Rome. The predominance of Latin as a language of culture in Italy, necessary, for example, to those attending the university, remains strong in Italy, yet the importance of translation into the vernacular helps in widening access to culture and should not be undermined. It remains fundamental for women. Only at the beginning of the Cinquecento, we see in Italy text in Latin and Greek being systematically printed, above all by Aldus Manutius. So Aldus founded the Aldine Press in Venice in 1494. Before Aldus, there were fewer than 10 Greek titles available in print for purchase in Italy. Manutius devoted the later part of his life to publishing and disseminating Greek text in their original form, but also books in Latin and in the vernacular. Before Manutius, publishers rarely printed volumes in Greek, mainly due to the complexity of providing a standardized Greek typeface. But Manutius commissioned the creation of typefaces in Greek and Latin based on classical Greek manuscripts so that readers could experience the original Greek text more authentically. He adopted the image of a dolphin wrapped around an anchor as his printer's mark. You see it in the slide. The dolphin and the anchor symbol was associated with the Latin phrase festina lente, meaning, hasten, make haste slowly, indicating quickness combined with slow deliberation in the execution of a task. The symbol and phrase were taken from a Roman coin minted during the time of the Emperor Titus, during the 1st century AD. Manutius' passions for the spreading of classical culture and business spirit can be seen in his pioneering creation of book in octavo, a smaller format that allowed people to carry them around and read them anywhere, not just in the library. This is the first example of a portable book, he called it Enchiridion, that can fit in your hand. Aldus was the first to print Aristotle, Thucydides, Herodotus, and Sophocles, among others. He was possibly the first printer to compare manuscripts to arrive at the most reliable text. He was the first to use italic type, a small font based on calligraphic handwriting employed in portable edition. He was the first to use, for instance, the semicolon as we know it today. Sarah Gwyneth Ross' study of book inventories from 16th century Venice, the city which during the 16th century published the highest amount of books in Europe, confirms the picture that in this period, thanks to the presence of printed books, education was within reach for men and women of the artisanal and mercantile class. The individuals studied by Ross are physicians, pharmacists, lawyers, metal workers, gathering texts related to their professions, but also connected to much broader literary interests. Among people who own books, we find women. For instance, Caterina, the wife of a Venetian goldsmith, had a small library which included Lucan's epic poem in translation and the Jewish historian Josephus. Dionigi Atanagi, active in the environment of Venetian printers, wrote a life of Signora Irene of Spilimbergo, in which he remembers, this woman, Irene, because, as he says, she read many books translated from Latin and Greek in the vernacular and others in other languages, dealing with morals, education, and the rules of Italian language. The presence of women as readers can also be noticed analyzing dedications, a paratext which was a norm in Renaissance books. Dedications offer valuable information on the range of people who wrote them and received them. Despite the frequency of dedicatory letters in Renaissance books, only recently scholars have started paying attention to the phenomenon of, the dedication. In some of them, the dedications of translated classics, women are acknowledged as ideal readers and the printed book as a new medium of education. Before attending university and learning Latin, women's access to printed books became paramount for their education. Among Italian publishers, Gabriele Giolito de Ferrari was the personality who perhaps most fully appreciated the potential of the vernacular and the female reader market. In 1523 in Venice, again, he established the bookshop of the Phoenix. A printing press and a bookstore, like my colleague Amron was saying. An analysis of Giolito's introduction to, here you can see his printer's mark, which is, a phoenix rising from ashes, and, the winged amphora. An analysis of Giolito's introduction to the book called About the Nobility and Excellence of Women, and I'll show you a picture of it. The previous, was just an enlarged version of this. A text originally written by Agrippa von Nettesham in Latin in 1529 highlights the presence of women and how Giolito fashions himself vis-à-vis them. He does not print the name of the original author nor of the translator, and instead gives great prominence to the dedicatee, a woman, Buonasuarda, from northern Italy's homeland, whose virtue, he states, is the greatest defense for women. The work is a gift to her, to Buonasuarda, but also a harbor for all women. In this way, Giolito shifts the focal point from a unique dedicatee to all women and highlights the book's formative influence on the public opinion. Equally aware of women's desire to have access to culture is Alessandro Piccolomini's, and the title of his book is On the Sphere of the World, and you can see a picture of the frontispiece here. Well, this is still Suarta. Okay, this is it. So Piccolomini's On the Sphere of the World, dedicated to Laudamia Forteguerri, and you can see her, in the dedication. In this compendium,